What is up, guys? This is Flop, and I'm coming at you with another video. And today we are going to be reviewing the Clash at Daytona. The 2019 Clash at Advanced Auto Parts Clash that took place at Daytona just now. I have a lot of thoughts to give, mainly about the end of the race. Not going to spoil too much, but let's just get straight into it. So 20 cars started the field. Kyle Busch and Paul Menard started up front, and we go green. Paul Menard and Kyle Busch start up front. Kyle Busch tries to make something happen on the bottom as basically Menard goes to the top with Brad Keselowski. Keselowski pushes Menard to the front. Kyle Busch falls back, and then they go immediately single file. And it's basically a freight train from there on out with Eric Jones and Ryan Blaney trying to make moves. Then after that, it's basically a rain delay, and it was about a 15-minute rain delay before we would get going again. And after that, the drivers got called to their cars. We went green again. We got a pretty good start. I believe it was like Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano on the bottom, but then everyone kind of went up to the top right immediately. Suarez tried to make a couple moves on the bottoms there, but it really wasn't doing anything. So after that, it was basically Paul Menard just leading the freight train of cars with Brad Keselowski, Ryan Blaney, and Joey Logano pushing behind. But then pit strategy came in because they had a competition caution at lap 25. So many cars went into pit road. Some stayed out, like Austin Dillon, Jamie McMurray, Alex Bowman, and Martin Truex Jr. stayed out. And the rest of the field went in to try to make their pit stops. And from there on out, the caution came out, and apparently Eric Jones had front bumper damage, and Austin Dillon had rear bumper damage, but ironically, the two didn't even touch. If anything, Eric Jones hit the back of Clint Boyer, I want to say it was, and that kind of offset everything. And so he had to get his front damage repaired, and then a couple more pace laps. Austin Dillon didn't even get his damage repaired in the rear, and everyone went into pit there. And it kind of just escalated through there, and we went back green. It was about 3 wide, actually, this time on the restart. Kyle Larson, Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski, and Eric Almirola tried to make something happen on the bottom. It just wasn't going their way. I believe Alex Bowman at one point tried to cut down to the bottom, but they ended up having to go back to the top for a little bit. And then Suarez tried to side draft Truex, and he made a lot of moves today. Daniel Suarez was probably one of the most aggressive drivers in the Clash today because he seemed to be one of the very few people that was constantly trying to make moves, constantly trying to maneuver the side draft and get to the corner panel of Martin Truex Jr. and get to the corner panel of Kurt Busch a couple times as well, trying to make a pass. So, huge credit to Daniel Suarez for making a lot of balls-to-the-wall moves there, considering what we have with this package of the Gen 6. What was I going to say? Yeah, so everyone goes to the top, but eventually, Keselowski and Hamlin get a good push. Logano and Ryan Blaney try to make a move on Jamie McMurray. So they got around Jamie McMurray, but then they went back to the bottom, and it was basically Logano, Blaney on the bottom, and then Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski, and others on the bottom. And then the rain came. We went red flag, I believe. I don't know if that was before or after this event occurred, but it was before that. Yeah, we went red flag when it was single file. We had that caution. Okay, we went single file after the restart with we went red flag for rain after the competition caution when everything was in single file. Then we went that 3 wide, making aggressive moves. You had Logano, Blaney, Hamlin, and Brad Keselowski in the bottom. Hamlin got a bit wiggly, getting out of 2, I believe, because Brad Keselowski gave him a huge shove. A lot of people were trying to make the bottom work, but again, with the shitty package we have with the Gen 6 at the play tracks, at least for Daytona, we're not going to have that for the second Daytona race or both Talladega races. But either way, it's still a shitty package nonetheless. And you had stuff like that going on, and they were trying to make moves. Logano eventually started to catch up to Kevin Harvick and Kurt Busch. And Paul Menard was leading with Jimmy Johnson being second and Kurt Busch third. And this is where the controversy and the shit show begins. Getting out of turn 2, Jimmy Johnson got a huge push from Kurt Busch and Kyle Busch, who were both on the outside. They gave Jimmy Johnson a huge shove, and Jimmy Johnson was not going to lift. He was going to go for it. And he went to the bottom of Paul Menard. Menard came down to make a block. And then side force kicked in. The one big problem with the Gen 6 car is side force, where the one corner panel is straight, the other is curved. And this time, except it happens with Jimmy Johnson's front bumper and being straight and Menard's corner panel being curved and skewed out. Jimmy tried to side draft Paul Menard, tried to get to the bottom of the yellow line, but because side force happened, Menard got loose, spun out, hit Kyle Busch in the corner panel, Busch spun, and then went up into Truex, and then the rest of the field just piled in. So many destroyed race cars. This wreck alone took out more than half of the field. Eric Jones was in it. McMurray was in it. Dillon was in it. Chase Elliott was in it. Martin Truex Jr., which really sucked. Kyle Larson, Austin Dillon, Denny Hamlin, Brad Keselowski, Clint Boyer, I believe I already said. And just Harvick was in it. It was a fucking mess. Eric Almirola was in it. More than half the field was in this wreck. The only cars that really escaped was Jimmy, Kurt Busch, Logano, and Blaney. Those are the only cars that escaped out of this wreck. It was an absolute fucking shit show. It was terrible. And then the rain started kicking in right after that wreck, and they pulled the cars into pit road, and then they declared Jimmy Johnson the winner of the 2019 Advanced Auto Parts Clash at Daytona. So I guess in a technical wise, Jimmy Johnson broke his winless streak at Daytona because he was claimed to be the winner. Because he was in first when they called the race. So they called the race with 16 to go when they were pulled into pit road, and Jimmy Johnson was declared the winner of the Clash. And oh boy, where do I even start with this? There was, and after Jimmy Johnson won the Clash, and by the way, congratulations to Jimmy Johnson winning the Clash. It's cool to see him break a 59 race winless streak. Even though this wasn't a point race in my eyes, it's still a win, and nonetheless. So it's cool to see Jimmy Johnson back in victory lane and see the number 48 in victory lane. It sucks that Canals wasn't with Jimmy Johnson when he won again, but hey, that's really cool to see Jimmy Johnson win. And there was a lot of controversy after the race, and I'm sure it's still brewing right now as of me recording this video. It's a common belief, I guess, within the last 3 minutes that Jimmy Johnson wrecked Paul Menard on purpose, and that couldn't be more not true. I don't even know what to tell you guys with this. People started saying that Jimmy Johnson, all he had to do was wreck Paul Menard and take him out to win the race, saying that Jimmy Johnson's talent is slipping because all he had to do was wreck Paul Menard to win the race. If you rewatch that replay, Jimmy Johnson tried to make a move because he had such a run on Kurt Busch and from Kurt Busch. If he were not to lift, he would hit the back of Paul Menard, and Menard probably would have lost it either way. But Jimmy, being the aggressive driver he is, he went to make a move on the bottom, and he tried to side draft off of Menard, and it ended up causing turbulent air, which caused Menard to get sideways and hit Jimmy Johnson, bounce him off, get sideways, and clobber to the wall and collect the rest of the field with him. That's not Johnson's fault. And because we've known for years, even since the COT was introduced in 2008 and 2007, 2008, we knew that side force was a key issue, and its purpose was to help drivers fix their cars when they're sideways. That's not the case to be at all. In fact, it causes more wrecks probably than the Gen 4 did. And this is a perfect example of why plate racing has been such a absolute gimmick and shit since the COT came out. Granted, when the COT came out, tandem drafting was a thing, and that was pretty cool. But once they got rid of the tandem drafting off the COT, it just went shit from there. And side drafting is basically you're trying to get to the corner panel of someone, and you're trying to get air off that car, and you're trying to make a pass. For example, like Larry McReynolds brought up during the Fox broadcast, which was mediocre, I'd say at best. Suarez was trying to side draft off of Truex, got to his corner panel, got turbulent air and slowed down Truex, but not to the point where Truex could have spun out. He did it just enough to the point where, he wouldn't take out Truex, but he gained himself momentum. And that was a perfect performance of the side draft. That's what you got to do with it. But sometimes, like in instance what we just saw with Jimmy Johnson and Paul Menard, the side draft goes into side force, and that plays a factor. And that ultimately caused Paul Menard to get sideways because Jimmy Johnson side drafted so hard, it caused turbulent air between the two side skirts. Menard ended up spinning around and crashing the entire field. People are saying that Jimmy Johnson was a dirty racer and he's not talented. If Jimmy Johnson wasn't talented, he wouldn't have went for that move. Jimmy Johnson, we should know by now, is a guy who goes balls to the wall. If Jimmy Johnson gets an opportunity to go for the win, he's going to go for it. No one seemed to be complaining when he went for the move on Martin Truex Jr. I wasn't even complaining about that because I knew Jimmy Johnson tried to make a win. You know, that wasn't his fault. He couldn't help the fact that he got loose, spun, and hit Truex. Can't help that. Jimmy Johnson is a balls-to-the-wall driver, and he'll do anything to win, but he won't wreck you. And if he does, he'll apologize it and accept it as his fault, unlike Austin Dillon did with Eric Almirola last year in the Daytona 500. The people that are claiming that Jimmy Johnson intentionally wrecked Paul Menard are ironically the same people that defended Austin Dillon when he dumped Eric Almirola in the Daytona 500. I say dumped because literally Austin Dillon said that the move was intentional. And he never once apologized to Almirola for hooking him in the corner and intentionally spinning him out. In this instance, Jimmy Johnson was trying to side force and get ahead. But, that being said, fucking side force happened. Menard got loose, spun right in front of the entire field, and collected the rest of everyone else. And now people are saying, oh wow, all that Jimmy has to do now is wreck the field to win the race. Again, if you know how cars work, you understand that side force has been a problem in NASCAR since the COT. Side force has been something no one has liked, but just has had to deal with. Jimmy Johnson won't wreck you to go for the win. We've seen this on multiple occasions. The Roval, he didn't try to wreck Truex. He spun out because he was going for the win. I don't get it. You're literally... It was side force. You could see when Jimmy Johnson was trying to make the move on Paul Menard in the bottom that he was trying to side draft Menard, and that caused turbulent air, and Menard ended up losing the car and spinning and wrecking. It's not Jimmy's fault that side force exists. And people are literally saying, oh, he shouldn't have even went for the move. And overall, that's my stance on bubble wrap. That was my stance on the Jimmy Johnson, Paul Menard, and big wreck controversy. Because literally after the big wreck, they just called the race and said Jimmy Johnson's the winner. You people really need to look back at that and think, well, side force could have played a big factor. And people are now comparing this instance to 2006, Jimmy Johnson and Dale Jr. when they both wrecked at Talladega. First of all, that was a Gen 4, and side force played basically no factor in that. Second of all, Brian Vickers was the one to bump the rear of Jimmy Johnson, spin him, and wreck into Dale Jr. And in fact, in the ARCA race last night, you saw Brendan McReynolds and Todd Gilliland drafting each other, getting right next to Brett Holmes, and Todd Gilliland basically did the same thing that Brian Vickers did to Jimmy Johnson and Dale Jr. in 06. He bumped him too much, got him loose, and they both wrecked. Both Brett Holmes and Brendan McReynolds. You saw it last night in the ARCA race, but this instance, Jimmy got a push from Kurt Busch, used the momentum solely, not anyone bump drafting him, he used the momentum solely to try to side draft on Menard and pass him, but because the Gen 6 car is so sensitive, especially with the old plate package that we're running for the 500 and the duels, the side draft was too much, and Paul Menard ended up spinning and wrecking into the entire field. So you can't blame Jimmy Johnson for the main reason he was going for a move. And Jimmy Johnson did not wreck Menard. He even said that wasn't his intention. And in the interview, Jimmy Johnson even apologized to Paul Menard. So I am very much on one side than the other. There's two sides now to this Clash controversy. One side says that Jimmy Johnson is the most untalented prick ever and that he totally wrecked him on purpose. The other side is it's a racing incident. A side force caused Menard to get loose and spin and crash. I'm totally on this side, not this side. I think if you're really going to accuse Jimmy Johnson of being untalented in that matter, rewatch the replay and think of how bad side force has affected these cars within the last decade. So you can't really blame Jimmy Johnson because the cars are so aero-dependent. Plus, even still, Menard came down onto Jimmy Johnson, and he came down to get a block, and that's not wrong. I'm just saying that when they both made the aggressive move, Menard came down, Jimmy Johnson went to the bottom to try to slingshot Menard and pass him for the lead. That is a common move, and I'm glad Jimmy Johnson made an early move like that instead of one to go in turn 4 of the race, like basically we saw in the Clash last year. I think a lot of people were complaining about this race. This race really wasn't that great. It kind of sucked, but I think people maybe over-complained about it because at 1 minute they were saying, oh yeah, it's single file, it's really boring. And then the next minute they were saying, oh yeah, Jimmy Johnson's a dirty driver, how dare he? So it's like pick and choose your battle. But in the end, I think that was a racing incident, and you can't help side force. It really sucks for Paul Menard because he was proving himself in that race. He was doing fantastic. Even since he joined the Wood Brothers last year, I think he's really proved a point that he can race on a plate track. This is going to become a common theme with Paul Menard, I think, now that we got the new aero package being solely dependent on restrictor plate racing. So, again, that's all the controversy, and that's how I stand on Jimmy Johnson. That's my way of backing up my reasoning for Paul Menard and Jimmy Johnson controversy. Overall, I give the race a 3 out of 10. Like, it was literally a pile of garbage. But I'm not going to sit here and kind of sort of complain about different things. I'm just going to talk about one thing each at a time. But the single file racing, literally after every single restart, was really boring, considering that no drivers wanted to make a move. In the first part, drivers were making moves, but that was only Eric Jones and Ryan Blaney trying to make a second groove work. Because at the beginning of the race, you got to remember that Blaney passed Ryan Newman at the very beginning of the race by making that. So clearly it can work. And by the way, Martin Truex Jr. also tried to make a second lane work. He got a push, tried to pass Clint Boyer after that, when he tried to start another lane. Almost passed him if he went a little bit higher. But it just wasn't going to happen. So there were driver efforts. But other than that, the single file racing with no drivers even trying was absolutely ridiculous. And it was also ridiculous seeing as how aero-dependent these cars and how you're not able to make a run on the bottom without any help like you used to with the Gen 4. So the single file freight trains was literally boring as hell to watch. And then at the end, you have the stupid controversy with Paul Menard and Jimmy Johnson, even though it's pretty obvious that that was a racing incident. And again, these are the same people that are comparing it to Jimmy Johnson or Austin Dillon and Eric Almirola. When with that incident, you can blatantly see that Austin dumped Almirola, and he even said that in his interview. And people are calling Jimmy Johnson also a self-righteous prick. If that was the case, he wouldn't have apologized to Menard and Wood Brothers Racing and everyone else in the field in his interview. I guess a lot of people didn't listen to that, but overall, I give this race a 3 out of 10. The freight train racing was boring. Menard was basically in the lead the whole time until the end. And then you had the shit show and huge crash at the end that wiped out my boy Martin Truex Jr., who had a top 5 run going. Truex got wrecked. Keselowski got wrecked. Suarez got wrecked. Blaney made it up, but he's the only driver out of my favorites that finished, 3rd or 4th? So this was overall a shit show for me, and cool. Now teams have to, spend millions of dollars trying to repair those cars again. Thank God you guys like Rex, right? Can't wait to see some of these teams shut down by 2020 if literally spending costs continue to be how they are. So this race was an absolute shit show. I hated the wreck at the end because it just tore up more than half the field, and they ended up calling the race due to rain. Rain was such a big factor, and the single-file freight train racing was boring. Plus, there were barely anybody in the stands. I didn't see much of anyone. There were I would say 10 people by the flag stand, but that was about it. So, I guess the rain suited how the race was overall, but I give the race a 3 out of 10. The freight train was boring. The wrecking was ridiculous. The final wreck with literally more than half the field getting torn up was stupid to me. And, that's my thoughts on the Clash. I gave it a 3 out of 10. Again, congratulations, Jimmy Johnson, on winning the Clash and technically, in my eyes, breaking your winless streak. Let's see if you can do in the Daytona 500 and maybe win a duel. So it was cool to see Jimmy Johnson win again. Again, congrats to Jimmy Johnson and Hendrick Motorsports on winning the Clash. That's always cool to see Jimmy Johnson win again and be back to his old roots. So it's cool to see Jimmy Johnson win again, in my opinion. It just sucks now that Jimmy has all this controversy on him. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Congrats, Jimmy Johnson, on winning the Crash. Congrats on winning. 3 out of 10 race. It was pretty boring, but there were times where drivers were making moves. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.